Hope you're ready for this.
Gonna be fun.
You will not stand in my way.
Frostborn. Hunger. This pleases me.
I do not fear you, mortal.
Your soul shall be mine.
Don't make me laugh.
Needs a brew? Oh, I do. Feel a shredding, baby. Let the battle begin.
All right. Welcome to Trolling HGC, episode number 25, The Korean Kings. I'm your host tonight, Bahgz. I'm normally the co-host to LiQuiuD, but he's not here. He's unable to make it. He's stuck at work. Unfortunately, the plan was for him to be here, but at the last minute, we had to scramble and make it happen. So here I am, running the stream and riding the struggle bus. But luckily, I've got Trent here to join me. Trent, if you're unfamiliar, is an esports consultant and writer. You can find him at his website, trentesports.com. You can find him on his Heroes Hearth blog that's linked in the show notes. As well, you can find him in his brand new YouTube series, Entry Level Esports, which is proudly hosted on the Trolls.gg YouTube page. Trent, what's going on, man?
Dude, I'm super excited to jump on and chat tonight. We just put up the latest episode of Entry Level Esports. That has been a ton of fun to learn as we're going. This week I bought a new microphone, and we've got like production graphics and my notes and stuff on screen, so it's all legit. It's real fun. I'm excited about it. I
don't know how much work Daz had to do in post, but it really looked cool. I liked how each team got highlighted as you were talking about them. It was awesome. So while I was working on the notes for this show, I was able to listen to your show in the background and have it play and glance at it, and it was really good stuff, man. So I'm glad that you joined the team, that you putting your brand name on our YouTube channel, and I'm looking forward to more of your content because it's great. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. We've got tons of ideas for new stuff we want to try as it keeps progressing. So definitely go check that out when you're done listening to this. Obviously, stay here because we want views. But then after that, go do other things that we also do. Absolutely. And with that, moving on to the next thing. Patreon. We have a Patreon, people. You can become a patron of the show. You can donate $1 or $2 per episode. It's weekly. It's Trolls.gg, shared with the Nexus Trolls. Anything that gets donated to the Trolls.gg Patreon goes into making our content better. This past year we bought BlizzCon swag, so the whole team went out to BlizzCon. We bought swag. We had pinhole sunglasses and t-shirts to hand out to the fans. Not sure how we're going to pull that money and use it this year yet, but we do plan on using it for swag or improving the show, anything like that. So if you're enjoying the content that we're producing, just consider, donating, becoming a patron to the show, and, getting the perks that come along with that, be it after show games, as well as, maybe getting your hands on some swag later down the line. You never know. I'd also like to thank our troll of the week, which is Trent, who's here with me tonight. Trent has guested on the show several times in the past. I am featuring him now as Troll of the Week because of Entry Level Esports. His second episode just came out today. He now has a total of 3, episodes 0, 1, 2, and 3. Today's episode highlighting why certain teams didn't host tryouts for free agents and why certain teams did host tryouts for free agents. My personal take on it is a tweet that I saw from Justin. Listen, if you don't get a tryout, maybe make your own team and see what happens. Right? That's the whole point of the open division. It's worked for a couple people so far. All right. Well, let's transition into the news, shall we?
Tonight on the Trolls.gg podcast network, Trollin HGC proudly presents Heroes Esports News, Notes, and Drama with your hosts, LiQuiuD and Bahgz.
All right, we're back. I might have hit the button a little too quickly, but we are back. I'm still working through this, people. Bear with. So, Trolls.gg is looking for a graphic designer. If you're interested, you can contact us via the website. Head to the Contact Us link, or you can reach out to us on Twitter, where DMs are open. If you're a graphic designer, you're interested in creating some content for the show, the site, whatever it may be, hit us up. We're always looking for extra help. Also, looks like LiQuiud's got a note hidden in here that we're doing an emoji contest. So the site, the Trolls.gg is a Twitch affiliate. So we have an emote that we don't currently have submitted. There's also a gift card giveaway. I'm assuming that the winner who creates the best emoji not only does that, they get to see their fine work used all the time. It looks like there will be a gift card involved too. I don't know for how much money or what it is. Maybe it's $20 of BattleNet bucks. I don't know. It's not labeled here, but if you're interested, again, DM the show, Trolls.gg, Trollin HGC. The Nexus Trolls DMs are open and available. You can contact them. I'm sure Daz or LiQiuD will get in touch with you. All right. And with that, we're going to smash another bumper real quick, because we're moving along pretty quickly here. And we're going to transition into what everyone is here for, which is GCWC talk.
The hook is going to help out, and we're going to see Stitch's fall as well. It's going to be a 1-for-1 trade. It's the 1-for-1 trade as we once again have the Dragon Blade used on the side of Genji. He's tried that in, dashes out, sail yellow.
That was just about the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life.
It's a dance party, and you're invited.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HGC Western Clash.
All right, we're back, and that one was a little smoother. And yes, Schizo, the font is a little interesting. When I'm in charge of overlays and production, I get to get cute with things, and I chose to go with a font that Lily would be proud of, Adventure. So yeah, spice it up, man. Spice is the spice of life. Change.
Dad's not here. We can do what we want.
That's exactly what it is. So looking at the results, GCWC is over. Spoiler alert, if you haven't caught up on that, it ended 4 days ago, guys. So get it together. Final standings, first place, KSV, Black. As a surprise to probably no one. Dignitas finished in second. Third place was Ballistics. Finishing in fourth was Fnatic. Fifth and sixth were two Chinese teams, Super Perfect Team and Challenge. And seventh and eighth went to Roll20 and Beyond the Game. So what I want to highlight here is the first. Well, I'm going to skip over the first day of matches on Wednesday, and because we already kind of talked about them last week, and I'm going to highlight what happened. Roll20 lost to SPT on Thursday in the first round of the losers round, a team that they 2-0'd in groups. Can you, Trent, in your opinion, what do you think happened there? I know you wrote an article about it. Maybe for those who haven't read it, could you share with them what your thoughts were on it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Roll20 got exposed, and that stinks for anybody that's in NA. Everybody enjoys memeing about North America, but SPT are not a bad team by any stretch, and they just kind of caught Roll20 off guard. Roll20 took a kind of awkward draft into the first game and were able to clutch it out because SPT kind of left the door open for them. They got crazy outdrafted by SPT in the second game. And then from there, it just kind of snowballed out of control. They tried to cheese out the last game on Warhead and took a bad second boss with no nukes that then just snowballed the core away from them. There were two different games, the Warhead game and the Cursed Hollow game, both where I think Roll20 just weren't used to how aggressive a confident Chinese team could be, because they were able to kind of walk over all of them in the group stages. But both on Cursed Hollow, they kind of kept Dahaka side pushing lanes instead of bringing him down to defend against SPT's push on their bottom keep. And SPT just never blinked and just walked in and eventually killed their core because Justin got caught out of position. And then same thing in the Warhead game. They thought they were safe to take a second boss because the first boss worked out, but SPT rotated quicker than they thought, and then took 3 nukes and a boss and walked in and ended the game. And that's the series.
It was I don't really like the war. I mean, I get it when your back's against the wall. They wanted to go to Warhead for the easy win, right, to tie up the series and take it to Game 5. But I don't. How many times?
Tempest.
Right.
So nobody has stopped it yet. Like, most teams ban Warhead, so there's not like that strategy is going to work pretty consistently for a fully coordinated team because so few teams even practice on it. Like, Bakery even said in an interview last year that if you somehow managed to get Dig on Warhead, you would win every time because they literally don't even practice it. Because they're just always going to ban it because they hate the map and think it's dumb, and it is. So I don't actually disagree at all with Roll20 trying that quote-unquote cheese strategy because teams just don't practice it. Like, North America is the only region where you see that consistently used, and there's no reason to think that it wouldn't work. And it did. Like, it worked on that first boss, and it was a bad call by Roll20 to try and take that second boss because the first boss went down quicker than they anticipated, and SPT rotated quicker than they expected them to, and they didn't have any nukes to cover the actual take of the boss. And there were a couple of also little tiny misplays. I think Artanis missed his swap, and that would have been a huge turning point in that team fight around that boss. So a couple of tiny things go differently, and we're talking about how nobody can beat North America's cheese on Warhead, and instead we're talking about how Roll20 shouldn't have gambled on a gimmick strategy. But I fully expect, like, come mid-season brawl, if Warhead is in the rotation and nothing drastic has been changed, we'll probably still see those same strategies tried because we're the only region that will actually play the map and know how to work the bosses and work for the fast end, because every other region just tries to avoid the map.
Hey, so EU's got Tomb of the Spider Queen, and NA's got Warhead, man. We like to blow. As I like to say, we like to blow shit up. So
yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, like,
they have a better map than we do.
Whatever. Hey,
our map's real dumb.
It's cheesy and stupid, but it's fun.
It's real dumb.
But, well, I mean, and give credit where credit's due. Super Perfect Team did ban out the Diva on the second ban phase on that map. I've got it pulled up now on Master League, so they kind of snuffed it out, right? So yeah, you know, so it was snuffed out to a degree. I don't know. It's just, it's depressing. And I looked through the drafts in that series. It's just like, it seemed like Roll20 got to play what they wanted to play in that series. Like, it wasn't, you know, Cure wasn't on a support in I don't think any of those matches. Let me take a look through here real quick. It was all solo support. It was all solo support. So he was gray main on Warhead. He got to play Li Ming on what was game 3? Cursed Hollow? Yeah, Cursed Hollow. And game 2 was Infernal Shrines, if I remember correctly, and he got to play gray main again. So it's like he got to play the ranged carries that he wants to play. So, and for the most part, as far as I can tell, everyone there is on a role that they're comfortable with. It's just they weren't necessarily able to execute, right? So
yeah, I mean, a lot of it was like their drafts were just the tiniest bit off. Like, you look at the Infernal Shrines draft, and they just like got screwed by the draft into having to last pick Johanna, which you can't win from behind with Johanna, and they got a little bit behind and weren't prepared for how much damage Jaina could dish out in that composition by SPT, and they just had no shot to win that game, literally because of that one pick. The rest of that draft is fine, but because of the way the draft worked out, they got left with a Johanna and just had nothing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You know, it's a shame they're all at the summit, because it would be nice to have one of them on the show to kind of like walk us through that draft, because I want to know, like, when you look at it, Johanna was the very last pick, right? And you want to know, like, why would you go, why Johanna there? Like, yes, your ETC, like, Justin's ETC was banned out there, but, you know, Muradin was an option, or the Nubarak, one of those, you know, tanks that have been seeing some play. So
I think my thinking is they're trying to contest Shrine Control against a Sonya Jaina comp, because they built the rest of their composition. Like, they've got Arthas and Gul'dan that are trying to lock down the point, And so now, and I think if I look at the draft correctly, like the Jaina comes before the Johanna, so they were not expecting Jaina to be the pick there. So they were thinking that with their Arthas Gul'dan Greymane, even though the other team has the Sonya, they still have the advantage on the Shrine.
Yeah,
but as soon as that Jaina gets locked in, that completely switches, and any of the other tanks aren't going to give. The only thing they've got left to pick at that point is their tank, and every other tank that's in the meta has got off a wave clear. Like you can't pick Leoric there, you can't pick a Nubarak there and expect to have any kind of Shrine control. So they tried to stick with their game plan and go for Shrine control instead of trying to flex into like an Anubarak and go for a isolation kill onto Rhaegar or Jaina, which I think would have been the better route. And they even, if you look at their Twitters and stuff, they're like, yeah, the Infernal Shrines game, we just got out drafted. Because they did. Like,
I hear you.
I don't want to derail the entire show reliving my Twitter fight with every other important person about how bad Johanna is, but she's real bad, especially when you're behind. And they got a little bit behind and then had to play into the ridiculous amount of zone control that SPT had. And they had a Johanna, and Johanna can't do that. Her kit doesn't let her fight good zone control. End of game.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on from that, I do want to take a minute to talk about what I saw with the meta. And with doing that, I've got this fancy little bumper I'm going to do to... All right, and we're back, Trent. We are live. So, earlier today, I dove into Master League. Well, a little bit last night, because last night I guessed it on Gankbush Squad, and I know Fringe is in chat, so thanks again for that opportunity, man. But I wasn't sure if they were going to ask me about some of the a little bit about GCWC, so I wanted to come with a couple of little fun factoids prepared. And with that, I just want to mention that the top 3 heroes in popularity for the group stage were Rhaegar at number 1 with a 94% popularity rate, Greymane number 2 at a 91%, and ETC at 89%. So pretty standard. ETC has made his way back into the meta basically since the HGC finals, maybe a little bit before that, starting in the playoffs. Double support, the bane of everyone's existence if you listen to Reddit and the internet, was used in 59% of the matches to the tune of a 48% win rate. The top 3 supports used in double support in those comps: Rhaegar, Lucio, Kharazim. This was also the first time we had seen Junkrat used for competitive play. He wasn't enabled for BlizzCon. Remember, we were on the Junkrat patch, but there was no Junkrat available for the HGC finals. And he got used a lot. It was kind of like when Genji first came out the very first time. Everyone was kind of excited to use him. Unfortunately, he was horrible. Like, straight up, booty butt cheeks horrid. He was the 5th most used assassin, but his win rate was 31%. And because of that, when the stage shifted to the playoffs, he didn't get played a single time when things got serious. Now, you had an interesting theory about that, Trent. You were saying before the show that you felt that maybe teams were kind of experimenting in the group stage. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, the way that the Gold Club format works is the group stage only matters for seeding. It doesn't eliminate anyone from the tournament like the BlizzCon format does, which is why so many people prefer the Gold Club format, because it's just for points and seeding. So, in essence, a lot of your games don't matter as much as they do in a normal tournament, so you have a little bit more flexibility to test some things. And so probably some teams saw promising things out of Junkrat in scrims and had a lot of theory about how successful he could be with isolation from his remote mine, with how impactful Riptire can be, with the wave clear. We saw him a lot trying to solo lane on like Dragonshire. And as a result of that, because on paper he seems really promising, teams were willing to throw him out a lot in the group stage, because even if it didn't work, it didn't mean that they were out of the tournament. But based on the data that they collected in the group stage, as you can tell from the win rate and from people figuring out how to counter him, like weird stuff worked. Like on Dragonshire, we saw Tyrael go solo lane against Junkrat and just straight up counter him by shielding the minions. And Junkrat didn't have enough wave clear to deal with that, and didn't have enough sustained protection and damage to dual 1v1 with a Tyrael. So he lost the lane that he had been drafted specifically to win. And so a lot of stuff like that just didn't work out in practice the way that it should have in theory. And as a result, people just went back to more standard assassins and solo laners for the playoffs, because that's the part that the tournament's on the line now. All the experimenting is done. You have to go with what you know works. And teams just weren't willing to keep trying to experiment with Junkrat at that point, because there were thousands of dollars on the line.
Fair enough, and that all makes sense. So I had high hopes for the crazy Australian, but it didn't work out for him, unfortunately. So
I think we'll see people try him in HGC. I think his kit is just too interesting not to, and all it's going to take is like a couple of number tweaks or the right meta coming up, the right map pool, to where somebody figures out something to where he works. Just because his kit is really impactful in the right situations. Those situations I think it's going to take more time for people to figure out exactly the optimal. He's going to end up being like a really situational pick, but I do think we'll end up seeing him some in the HGC.
I think that's fair. It's just he's close, right? There was a reason why they all wanted to use him. It just turned out that he wasn't quite close enough. So the other interesting that happened, we talked a little bit about it on the show last week, was we had a patch change halfway through this tournament. So in between the group stage, we shifted over to the playoff stage, where literally every single support was nerfed by 5%, except for Lily. It's that caused a huge uproar on Reddit. That blew up the internet. I'm sure all the pros weren't happy about that. They didn't have tournament servers to practice on or play the rest of the tournament on, so they had to figure it out on the fly.
Yeah, this is a great time to plug the pilot episode of Entry Level Esports, because I went off for about 30 minutes about this specific thing. So I don't want to dwell on it too much here, because it's old news at this point and everybody's kind of heard everything that happened. But it definitely changed what we talk about in the playoffs, because every team kind of had less time to prepare their compositions and adapt for the playoffs, because it was on a completely different patch. But definitely after this, if that's news to you, that you don't know what we're talking about with the patch change, or you don't know why that's such a big deal for a tournament to have a patch halfway through, definitely go listen to episode 0 of Entry Level Esports and listen to me rant about that for a good 30 minutes.
It was really well thought out. So I really like what you did there. It's a really educational piece. If you guys aren't sure why it happened, how it happened, or why they didn't really have much of a choice but to do what they did, give it a check, give it a view. All right. Now, with that being said, moving on to the playoff stage, post-patch, post-support nerf, the top 3 heroes in popularity were ETC, who got a slight bump. He went up to 94%. Lucio was the big benefit of the massive Rhaegar nerfs, because Rhaegar got more than the 5% nerf. He lost in wave clear. He had a couple talent changes moved. So Lucio skyrocketed up to 94%, and Genji, who I believe was in 4th, and I didn't have him listed, but he was already kind of high up there, sat at 89%. Double support, we all theorized, would take a drastic dip. The whole reason why this support nerf even happened was so that we wouldn't have to deal with double support anymore, right? So they were trying to murder double support. I mean, not murder it, but like really lessen it. They were partially successful in that the amount of matches we saw it in did go down. It was used, but it was still used in 43% of matches, which is almost half. And the win rate actually went up. I don't necessarily have a theory as to why that happened, except for the fact that the best team in the world that won the entire tournament was using double support. So maybe they skewed that stat to a degree. The top supports we saw used were Lucio, Uther, and Karazim. So you see Rhaegar completely just out of there. We don't know if he'll bounce back or not, or what the story is there, or how that all worked out. We don't have someone on the inside who was competing at the event to tell us, but we can just go off the data that we do have.
So a couple of things to take away from here. My theory on the Rhaegar issues is Rhaegar gets hit the hardest by survivability nerfs because he can't ancestral himself and he has to be in melee to get value out of his wolf bite, feral lunge, whatever it's actually called. I just call it dog bite, but
it's a technical term.
Because of that, I think it was kind of like we talked about with Junkrat, where teams didn't want to keep experimenting. Teams had such a short amount of time to mess with the support patch that supports were probably kind of nervous to take Rhaegar into a game because he lost the thing that made him overpowered in Lightning Bond, and he has no tools to get out of situations, and now he has less health. So if you are used to him being able to get out of certain situations, now suddenly he can't, and that makes him a way more risky pick, whereas, Lucio has tons of mobility and a knockback to get himself out of situations. Uther can Divine Shield himself at the very least, or even when he's dead, he creates value. Karazim is crazy mobile. So you see supports rise in popularity that have more ability to keep themselves alive when teams don't have a ton of time to adjust to how the supports have been changed.
It was kind of like an unfortunate situation for all of them. I kind of having for them all to scramble like that. Ultimately, though, I think it's fair to say that the best teams came out on top regardless, and we didn't get any wacky results because of it, which is what a lot of people are afraid of when something like this happens, that we don't necessarily...
I'm willing to say that it's the only reason Roll20 got 7th. Well, let's be totally biased and say that Roll20 would have gotten 4th if the patch hadn't changed. 100%. Totally serious about it.
Really? You think so?
No.
All right.
My prediction... when we talked to Yitboss after the last show I was on, I did predict that because we didn't do predictions live on the air, but I did predict that Roll20 would get 4th. And I absolutely stand by the fact that I think that roster has the potential to take 4th in this tournament. They just did not show up against SPT. If they had beaten SPT, they absolutely could have beaten Fnatic. Based on what we saw from Fnatic on the last couple days of the tournament. I think Fnatic really got exposed on those last couple days by Dignitas and Ballistics and KSV, but Roll20 just was not ready to do that yet, as they showed against SPT. And it may very well be that SPT had a better read on the patch and that gave them the edge in that game, but that's not a big enough excuse for Roll20 because SPT showed in the earlier stages of the tournament that they are like China is just behind all of the other regions. And so the best team from North America should be able to take on in any situation, the second best team from China. But I do think it played a role, but the way that Roll20 lost those games is just, they just made bad calls, and they made a couple of bad calls in draft, and they made a couple of bad calls in their shot calling, which was the bane of their existence throughout that's kind of their story for the whole tournament.
For sure.
The bright side of that is if they clean those things up, they're absolutely a contender, and we've seen enough other pros tweet out similar sentiments that Roll20 is right on the verge of being terrifying. So hopefully they come back from Summit this weekend and they review some of this tape and identify those areas, and then they roll into 2018 and smash everybody and show up at the Clash.
You know what? Before we move on with the show, I want to just park here for a second and chew on that thought. I've been jumbling this around in my mind. So, Roll20, and time will tell. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but what if they just dominate NA, right? Like, they dominate NA, but what if that just ends up being bad practice? And like, how do you, if you're so far ahead of your own region, like what can you do when you're not playing against EU or Korea every weekend to try and catch up to those regions? Like, that's what I want to know.
So this is a problem that happens all the time in MOBAs. Not to reference the game that everybody gets annoyed at me for referencing, but this is literally one of the reasons why Korea is so consistently dominant in all of the games that they're dominant in, is because they get better practice. Teams get to play against KSV Black every week. And what happens when you go to these international events or when you play against teams that are better than you is your bad habits and your weaknesses get exposed. That doesn't happen when you're playing against people weaker than you. It's the same in anything else. It's why if you ever take up tennis, every tennis coach in the world is going to tell you find people who are better than you and play against them. Don't waste your time playing against people worse than you because you won't learn anything. The same is true if you've ever played a fighting game. Like when I play Rivals of Aether a lot online as just kind of my downtime game. And when I play against somebody that's worse than me, I'm like a god. Like everything that I do works and I never have any problems and I think I'm amazing at the game. And then when I play against somebody who's better than me, they figure out that I have a bad habit where every time someone attacks me, I roll to the right and then dash backwards. I dash attack back every single time I roll to the right. It's a horrible bad habit that I've had for 15 years of playing Smash Brothers, and I'm trying to correct it, but it happens. And a better player exposes that habit and shields and punishes me every single time that I do it. And when they do that, every time I face somebody that punishes that, by the third game that I play against them, I'm doing that habit a little bit less. So that habit's getting exposed, which allows me to correct it. I don't even know I have that habit unless somebody punishes it. And so what I think is going to happen with Roll20 is they got exposed in this tournament. A lot of their bad habits, a lot of their weaknesses got exposed. A lot of the meta-specific stuff isn't going to be useful. Their hero pools and those sorts of things, their drafts aren't going to be improved a ton because the meta is going to change so much before January. But their individual mechanical things, they're going to be able to go back and watch those games against KSV, those games against Dignitas, the games against SPT that they lost, and find, okay, in this situation, I thought that I had an advantage because every time I do this in NA, I have an advantage. But here's how Rich and Reset punished me for it. And now I know that. The problem being, like you said, if they just come into North America and just roll over North America all season long, none of their habits and none of their drafts are going to get exposed during the regular season, which is absolutely going to be a problem for them going into international tournaments because they're going to have a bunch of stuff that's easily exploitable that no one in North America was able to catch them out on. And the better teams are going to figure out how to do that after the group stage and do exactly what happened here.
So that's my biggest concern as well, and that's why I brought it up, is I get the vibe, and now I could be wrong, and I could have egg on my face after making this comment, but I get the vibe that this team's going to come home, and they're going to roll through North America. Like, maybe Tempo Storm will really, bring it to them. Maybe the new Team Freedom will really compete with them as well, and I would really like to see that, but I get the feeling that the new Roll20 roster is going to roll through North America. They're not really going to be pressed. And because of that, they're going to go to internationals, and they're going to, I have concerns that they'll let the region down because they are just not, well, they're not, I don't know, battle scarred enough for international events, right? That's the best way I can describe it.
Here, there's a couple things in there. First, for the overreactors that are going to freak out the first couple weeks, I predict that Roll20 is going to lose at least one of their games in the first 2 weeks because they're behind on the huge changes to the game, the globe changes, the camera changes, the ammo changes. Every other team has been scrimming on that patch on the PTR for a while, and Roll20 is just now arriving, and now they're at Summit. So they're going to be way behind on the overall meta of the game because some of those changes are so drastic. You know, all the timers are different. The tributes and things spawn later. Towers of Doom is now a 40-minute long map for some reason. So I think they're going to struggle a little bit in playing catch up to that. But once they adapt to that, I think they will definitely be dominant. But going back to our tennis example, if you play against people weaker than you a lot, you tend to start to play down to their level. And so I think Roll20 will be pretty strong, but I think they'll get surprised once or twice, which will allow them to stay focused and not get overconfident or anything like that. That said, North America at some point is going to have to start going and boot camping in Korea. I don't know why it's not a thing yet. I don't understand. Maybe it's just a money thing because we haven't had the organizations with the funds to support a Korea boot camp like Fnatic and Dignitas can, because they're old League of Legends organizations, and that's just what you do in League of Legends. But at some point, every team, like teams for North America, are going to have to go to Korea because that's the only way you get exposed. That's the only way you play consistently against teams that are better than you, and it just has to happen. I think it's such an advantage to boot camp in Korea. I think it's why Europe is so strong at BlizzCon, because they boot camp in Korea and North America doesn't. I think if this Dignitas roster got to play the first half of HGC in Korea instead of in Europe, they would win the mid-season brawl without even being challenged. Because the roster is already so good and it's playing in a weaker region than Korea. And if they got to consistently play against KSV Black every week and in scrims, they'd be untouchable. So that's the only way that Roll20 becomes something relevant on the international stage, is if they go boot camp in Korea. There's no other way.
Well, time will tell if they decide to go do that before the mid-season brawl. I tend to agree with you in that regard. I was very surprised when all the players were very confident that boot camping in Las Vegas, and while EU all went to Korea, would benefit them. And I guess that they felt that, you know, developing their own meta and hiding strats was probably in their best interest for the playoff stage, which maybe there's probably some validity to that. But I think kind of seeing what the other teams are going to bring, it's too much of a value, I feel like, I don't know, to pass up.
Yeah. To answer the question from Schizo, Miracle isn't owned by the same organization anymore. They're not sister teams anymore. So that deal may not be a thing anymore where they only scrim each other, because KSV only bought Black. I think they bought both rosters, but with the new franchise rules or the ownership rules, you can't own two teams in the league. So I don't know how they're going to resolve that before the season starts, but there isn't going to be a KSV Black and a KSV Miracle to my knowledge. There's just going to be a KSV. So I would expect that we'll see that change.
As I currently understand it, Miracle is just Miracle currently. So yeah. And then isn't that a great example of just like straight up like FU money? Like, I'm going to buy two teams, even though technically, like, I'm going to pay for two teams so I can just get the one, right?
Well, it's a
No, KSV's no joke. They bought the best league team in the world. They bought the best Overwatch team in the world.
They got some stuff.
Yeah.
But it's also just a standard business move to to grab Miracle from, because they probably got Miracle real cheap from MVP. They paid a bunch for MVP Black, and then MVP was getting out of the league at that point and said, we can either try and sell Miracle to some other organization, but there aren't a ton of organizations biting in Heroes yet, or KSV probably just made them an offer and said, hey, we'll take this roster too, give you a little bit of extra cash, and instead of you just releasing them, and then we'll sell that spot to someone else, or we'll give it to my cousin Fred, who wants to own a HOTS team.
Yeah. I don't know what the deal with Miracle is now. It's probably just another one of the unsponsored Korean teams, sadly. To answer your question, Arthur, KSV was not involved in esports before this. They their first tippy toe into esports was when they bought the Lunatic High roster for the Overwatch League and turned it into the Seoul Dynasty. But the story for another show.
Yeah, they are now basically the strongest organization in esports, just out of the blue, because they have what people are thinking is the best Overwatch team. They have the world champions from League of Legends, and they have the best HOTS team.
I don't even league. The league one is probably the most competitive league that they're in. The league, because it SKT is really close to. You would say is very competitive with the. I don't follow league, but I know that.
SKT is the best team in the world. They got upset this year by Samsung, who KSV bought. But if you were going to put money on it, I would bet SKT is going to be better than them next year. But yeah, the Samsung also won the one season that SKT didn't make it to. So that organization is still that organization and those players are still stupidly good.
Yeah, it's for the Overwatch perspective of it. Now that we're off the rails, is the Seoul Dynasty is the best team, and it's probably not even close. I don't think there's it's not like a 1A and a 1B situation. They're firmly planted as the best team in the world. But back on the rails, I wanted to circle back.
Heroes show.
Yeah, right. Heroes show. Trollin HGC. Here we are. Schizo, you mentioned it before about how Lucio is the way to go. I think now I mentioned that Lucio, he had the really great win rate. He had a high usage rate. I think part of these stats might be skewed by the fact that Black used him a lot, and obviously they're the best team in the world, as well as Zelia basically. I don't want to say one-tricked him, but he has a small support hero pool right now, which is fine. He just role swapped. That's fair. And Lucio was one of those heroes that he was really good at. So I think they kind of carried his stats. We need a much bigger sample to really kind of infer any kind of information out of that. Also talking about the playoff meta, the Warrior and Assassin meta kind of basically stayed the same. They weren't touched, which makes sense. The only thing that really of note happened there was Junkrat fizzling out of the playoffs. I did want to highlight here what the top two teams kind of did differently, and that's Dig and KFC Black. So Dig played 19 matches in the playoffs. They lost in the very first round. Were knocked down to the losers bracket and had to win their way back up to the grand finals. And they did. And they played a lot of matches. They played 19 matches. And only 7 of those were double support. So less than half, roughly, 40%. I'm doing math in my head right now. Whereas KSV Black only played 10 matches. They only dropped one map in the entire playoff run. And 6 of their 10 matches that they played were double support comps. Lucio was both teams' favorite support, and on Black in particular, Lucio was split between Sake and Kyocho. So I just wanted to highlight that Dig seemed to prioritize running solo support comps, and KSV Black prioritized double support comps. And it's kind of interesting to think about, Blizzard went out of their way to nerf supports to kind of try and shy away from this double support meta that we're in. And the best team in the world is still running it, and running it very successfully. So is that a combination of like KSV's Black is like so much better than everyone else that they didn't have to make an adjustment and just kept running the same strats that they had anyways? Or do they know something that nobody else knows, and that double support's still the way to go? Like, what do you think?
So I think it's a couple of things. We've seen historically Korea in Heroes be not super interested in adapting. That was one of the reasons that Fnatic and Dig were able to do so well at the midseason brawl this past year, because the Korean teams just were not super focused and didn't have the European meta on lock and didn't have an answer for Anubarak. So they had to spend bans on him and couldn't figure out how to deal with him in their matches.
Yeah.
So I could see as a result, it's still a really small sample size, so it's tough to get a ton of data out of 6 out of 10 matches. If they played 19, they might have only played 6 double support games. But I think it would be reasonable to say that out of everyone, KSV feels the least amount of pressure to adapt to a new patch quickly, and historically doesn't necessarily adapt unless forced to, and nobody in this tournament forced them
to do anything. Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it. I think also we have to be careful a little bit about saying that Blizzard was specifically trying to kill double support. Basically what they wanted to do was make it so that double support wasn't always and infinitely the most optimal strategy, because that's what had happened by supports having so much healing, so much health, and so much damage and wave clear. You weren't losing anything by playing double support, whereas now you can still play double support to enable certain compositions that you want to run, but to do so, you're sacrificing other things. So now you're better protected against double reset comps. Your hard carries are better enabled by double support, but you really suck at wave clear, and you can't jungle for free on Rhaegar. So I think we're still going to see double support. I mean, I know reports that I've heard from scrims on the PTR, double support is still very much a thing. It's just not the only thing. And honestly, I'm completely fine with that. I think it's really interesting to have double support be a part of the meta, but not the dominant force in the meta.
I'm okay with it being a thing as long as it's not the thing. And because when it becomes the thing, and here, like, I don't think of double support as like straight up cancer. Like, and I'm not playing it in every single one of my matches like these guys are or were, but I never thought of it as like cancer. It's almost kind of entertaining to watch. It's just like I like the long drawn out team fights where it can get really dramatic as resources slowly get depleted, and it's just like someone is like on the threshold of dying and then they don't. It's like almost like soccer to a degree, but like where someone almost scores but then they don't. Which is probably why a lot of Americans hate soccer, right? And hockey.
Yes.
But when it's the only thing and it's every single match, it's boring.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely a problem that needed to be changed. And Heroes of the Storm, we don't have to necessarily derail on this topic tonight completely, but Heroes of the Storm is always going to have a problem because healing exists so prominently in the game. Healing in MOBAs is just a problem. There's a reason that the 2 most popular MOBAs don't heavily rely on it. And that was a very specific decision in designing League of Legends, to not have supports be healers. Because in these kinds of team games, healing is just really on a razor's edge of being broken constantly. So as a result of that, we're always going to see Blizzard struggle to figure out how to balance healers properly, how to make the meta fair and interesting and allow for things like Medivh and Tyrande to be viable without being overpowered. We're going to keep seeing weird stuff like Anna and Alex Straza that don't quite work as supports but have really cool kits. Because just fundamentally in MOBAs, healing is just a very problematic mechanic. And like I would absolutely be in favor. They can't do it because it's a Blizzard MOBA, but my favorite change ever for Heroes would be if they just completely reworked every support and removed healing from the game, because I think it's just always going to be a problem.
It's something they struggle with. It's not just this game. It's something they struggled with in WoW Arena. And like you said, it's a battle. And, you know, we're not a League show, but League might have hit it on the head when they decided to not go that route and save themselves that egg. So with that, I want to pivot out of the meta section of the show. And I just want to we've already touched on it a bit, but I want to share our thoughts and our opinions with the internets about how kind of like the big four teams did. And when I say big four, I mean big four in like Q rating teams did. I didn't
relevancy.
All right, relevancy. We'll go there. Everyone on Ballistics is going to send me hate mail because I don't have them listed. But we'll start off with KSV, and it's probably going to be short and sweet. They only dropped one map. They're clearly still the best team in the world. Do you have anything you want to add to that? I mean, I already mentioned that their use of double support and success with it against the best teams in the world, despite the nerfs, we already went into that. Like, maybe they're just so much far and away better than everyone else that they didn't need to make the adjustment to the new patch.
Yeah, it's tough because they're also the only team that didn't have a roster change out of the teams that we care about for this show. Even Ballistics had a roster change going into the tournament, so it's like they just had such an advantage and are also the best team in the world. So like there was never a chance that any other team was going to win this tournament. It just wasn't possible because not only are KSV ridiculously good, but they also had such a distinct advantage over every other team. But what's really incredible about KSV is just their mastery of understanding what they can do to other teams. Like I didn't get a chance to actually put out a recap for the finals, mostly because I thought no one would read it because it was a 3-0 stomp. But if you go back and watch the end of that first game of Dig versus KSV, just watch them at the bottom keep at the very end. They don't have an objective. They don't have a significant wave. They don't have a ton of like mercenary pressure or anything. And they're not even ridiculously ahead, like so much ahead that any team would know to make a core call there. And they just do. Like they just know exactly what they can do to Dignitas. They know exactly how much they can get away with, and they just straight up decide to end the game, and Dignitas has no response to it. And that kind of dominance is something to behold. Like if you haven't gone and watched the finals because it was a 3-0 stomp against Dig, those games are fascinating to watch. They are just so in command of knowing their win conditions. And I think that's one of the things that they do better than every other team is they know the situations to not put themselves in to allow a team back into a game. And they also are always mindful of their win condition and always play to it. And I think that's one of their biggest strengths, aside from just being better at playing the video game than everybody else.
So that's it, right? So like they're the best team in the world. They've always been essentially the most mechanically gifted team in the world. The only team that I would say comes close now is probably Dig and Ballistics, to be fair. Unfortunately, KSV in their back pocket has the trump card of continuity with the roster. as well as just great shot calling, which they've also always had. It's something that they kind of lacked behind Ballistics back in the day when Noblesse was leading the charge, but now he's coaching Black. So there are a lot of things that stack the deck for KSV in their favor. They're the best team in the world. We all predicted they were going to win GCWC. Mopsio was disappointed with my show title when he saw it when the pre-show started, because it's just, we didn't really get surprised at all with they dropped a couple of maps. That was the surprise. That was basically it, that they just didn't go undefeated throughout the whole thing. They stomped their way through it as expected. The biggest and most intriguing thing, I think, outside of Roll20, because we're NA homers, the second most biggest and intriguing thing was how strong the new Dig roster looked.
Yeah, they're real good.
Like, don't get me wrong, they had a couple of rough patches where Poyik got, he was nervous what was on day one. There were a couple of situations where they like Xaylia playing Uther wasn't great, but I mean, with those blemishes, right? This team looked insane. It's a team with it's the most mechanically gifted EU team, and as far as I'm concerned, it's always been arguably the best team in a micro sense, but they took that to a whole nother level, and their draft situation now it feels a lot more flexible than it ever used to be. Before it was a lot more rigid, and I don't want to use that as I don't want to sound like I'm taking a shot at Mene, but it just seems Poyik brings something different to the table that this team desperately needed, and they're thriving with that. Now, it just seems like Xaylia kind of needs to get settled into his new role, and he will. He was always a very strong mechanical player. That's why the team picked him up at the start of 2017 HGC. And as he kind of grows that hero pool and gets a little more situated with his role in the team, I think this is going to be a team to look out for. Like what we had in Fnatic last year, I think is what we're going to get from Dig in 2018. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're the second best team in the world. Ballistics will likely catch up because they have to play KSV, going back to that conversation we had where they're just going to be able to get better as a team faster.
They had a role swap as well too.
Yeah.
So there was probably some of that was part of it as well.
Definitely. But like if you go back and watch the Ballistics versus Dig series, the games that Dignitas didn't win, Ballistics did not beat them. Like, Dignitas lost those games by Xaylia completely misplaying on Uther, by having a slightly clunky draft. Like, those games were Dignitas's to win, most of them. And that's with their support literally being able to play two heroes and not having a ton of experience on the role. Like you said, Poyik had a ton of nerves in the early stages and came into his own and made some astonishingly good plays, not just in like skill shot accuracy, his positioning and spacing. Like, he has the spacing knowledge of a Street Fighter player. Like, there's a team fight where he's on Greymane and has literally a pixel of health against Ballistics, and he manages to just like perfectly stay spaced out enough so that the enemy team wants to try and secure that kill, but just doesn't have enough range to land anything. And he keeps them interested just long enough for all of his stuff to come back and to get a heal and to come back in and clean up the fight. And it's not him like going crazy reset on Li Ming, but it's these tiny little micro things that he can do with his mastery of his hero pool that make him so good as a primary ranged threat. And he's still so new to the scene. Like, that's the thing that's so exciting about Dignitas, is their ceiling is so high with this roster because they've got a ridiculous offlaner, a god tier tank, the best flex possibly in the world in terms of hero pool depth, and then their support and their primary ranged are just like they can just keep climbing throughout the whole season, and they could be twice as good at BlizzCon as they are right now if the roster stays together. Yeah, they're ridiculous.
So Poyik was the hot name during this free agency period, and he's Swedish, and we had indications that Schwimpy was leaving the team, and it just seemed like the natural fit that he was going to Fnatic, and that's why I was so surprised that when he ended up on Dig, because you thought if they were going to try and keep the Swedish comms going, like, and Schwimpy was leaving, the ideal replacement to if you're going to lose a mechanically gifted player like Schwimpy, then you would want to pick one up.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is Mene is really good friends with a couple of guys on Fnatic, and they wanted to play together. By that, in the same way, Snitch and Poik are really good friends, so there was a fit there. Also, if you take that out of it, which that's probably the primary reason that happened.
I think that's fine.
Also, the reason that Dignitas struggled, the biggest reason that they struggled, like Mene is a phenomenal player, but he didn't fit into the double support situation because his supports aren't great and it's not where he's best. And he doesn't have an awesome Genji, Vala, Tracer, these things that are enabled by double support. So they had to put Snitch on those things and put him on double support, which basically weakened two roles for the team. Whereas you bring in Poik, who not only has competent mages, but is ridiculous on the Greymanes, Valas, Genjis, and Tracers that Mene couldn't play. So it's a huge upgrade at the primary ranged role, and it allows Snitch to go back to being the flex. Whereas on Fnatic, Quacknix is the primary ranged. So bringing in Poik, you're now having those two players compete for Greymane, for Falstad, for Vala, for those pieces, and then you basically now don't have a flex because Schwimpy was their flex. So that I think the way that the rosters worked, it would have been a little bit clunkier for Fnatic to pick up Poik, in addition to the fact that they wanted Mene and Dignitas Snitch wanted to play with Poik.
I think this is a good time to segue into Fnatic too, because I wanted to mention that it's the team looked significantly weaker than Ballistics and Dick, and yes, they looked stronger than the Chinese teams, and Roll20, it was close, but they were probably still a little bit of a step ahead of them. But the team looked significantly weaker, and my concern is the loss. Not so much like, yes, a lot of people were BMing Bad Benny, right? Like, so they were talking about how he was getting caught out and how much weaker he looked in his new role, and I just want to chalk that up to that. Bad Benny's a hardworking player. He was a great tank player. I think he has the ability to become a great solo laner. It's just going to take time, and it was leveraged against him in that situation. But my biggest concern is the loss of Schwimpy. Like, they don't. So Genji is still really viable in the meta, and it just seems like now we've seen Quacknix play Genji, but typically, as far as I remember, and someone correct me in chat if I'm wrong, Schwimpy was their Genji players. Schwimpy was their, if it was a micro-intensive hero, Schwimpy played that hero, and they don't necessarily have that player right now on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things with Fnatic. So one, Bad Benny got stuck on Rhaegar a bunch, and he's a tank player moving to melee. There's no reason that he should have a great Rhaegar. So you really kind of can't hold those games against him. It's kind of like when Roll20 had to stick Glaurung on Brightwing. That's not a Glaurung hero. The meta shifted in a way that didn't benefit Roll20, and as a result, they got exposed because they didn't have a Brightwing player. They have fixed that now, and then the meta changed. But so Fnatic was trying to experiment with playing the double support meta while still letting Mene have his mages, and it just didn't work out super great because that's not anything that Bad Benny's ever been required to do is master Rhaegar. So I take those games out of the pool, and then you look at his Arthas was fine because that's a tank, and his Sonya at the end was actually really good. Like his Sonya evolved over the course of the event to where now he absolutely has no issues with Sonya at all. So I think his pool is going to improve. I also think this tournament is not reflective at all of Fnatic because they made drastic changes in the offseason, as well as you have to think they picked up 2 players who were also at BlizzCon, whereas Dignitas picked up Poik, who was fresh from sitting at home watching BlizzCon. So all of these players went from boot camping in Korea to Los Angeles or to California to, I think, like Anaheim is where BlizzCon is, to play in BlizzCon, like breathed for 2 days and then went to China and played in this tournament. So by the time the group stage even kicked off, every single member on this team was just mentally drained from being focused at such a high level. And then on top of that, into the playoffs, they had to then relearn a brand new patch, which is 100% a mental thing because you have to theorize what works on a patch because you don't have time to test it. So I think as an analyst, you always want to use what's available to you. That you can only use what you see. But I think if you take Gold Club as, oh my gosh, Fnatic is really looking weaker and is going to struggle in 2018, I don't think this tournament is a fair reflection of what Fnatic can be.
I'd agree for the most part. Again, like I said, I don't think Bad Benny was. I don't think he's going to be an issue in 2018. I think he's going to be fine. He's going to be a really solid solo laner. I have faith in the person behind the avatar controlling the mouse and the keyboard. I just want to see how, and we'll have to see how the meta shakes out, and whether the rest of all the pieces on that team kind of gel the way they need them to for it to work. Interestingly enough, Roll20 also made some changes going into this tournament, and I guess that's the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway from GCWC is that it is a tournament that's like, it's almost like the preseason, right? We get to preview the new rosters and see how they all kind of like, we get to see the diamond in the rough, the unmolded and unfinished clay sculpture that's slowly being molded through the crucible of the season. Roll20, very hyped going into this tournament. We heard great things about them. Unfortunately, the results didn't really back up what we heard, but we did see glimpses of something special. To me, my opinion is Roll20 feels a lot like Dig, but from North America, and less experienced and worse. But it's a compliment, because Dig looks like a team with potential to be the absolute best team in the world, like even better than Black. Roll20 looks like that, but just to, I would say, a lesser degree. They look like they could be an elite team, a top 3, top 4 team in the world. Maybe not the best team in the world. I know that's their goal, and I would love it if that comes to pass. The team looked really strong mechanically, and their macro tactics were right on par with the rest of the world. They looked really, really good. I mean, it's just, me personally, and I think you agree with me, is their shot calling looked weak, and they had questionable drafts a couple of times. And it really hurt them. I don't want to say that as an indictment of the team's drafter and shot caller, which I believe is still just Ding, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that those two things are some of the harder nuances in Heroes to excel at, especially at the absolute highest level. To me, and I don't want to just kind of feed the excuse narrative, but I'm going to. It's just, it seems like the roster is still kind of figuring out where all the pieces fit, so they can draft accordingly. And after that clicks, they will help them with the shot calling as well, because they'll understand what each player's capabilities are on a particular hero, so they can make decisions in game based on that. So
to jump off of that on the shot calling thing, I think it ties back into our conversation about not getting your habits exposed in the regular season playing in North America. Roll20 steamrolled through the last phase of HGC. Like, they murdered every single team except for, I think they dropped like one map to even in death, which was funny. But they didn't get exposed. Like, Justin's shot call. Justin was a new shot caller. He took over from Glaurung when Glau decided he didn't feel like doing it anymore, and had to learn how to do it. And his team was so much better than every other team in North America that his shot calling didn't get exposed at all. Teams didn't capitalize on his mistakes. So then in this tournament, they did. You go back and look at in the group stage, the Fnatic series. Roll20 won both of those games. Throughout the entire early game, the mid game, every team fight, Roll20 won those games. And then they did something at the very end to cause themselves to lose both games. In the Cursed Hollow game, the only way they lose is if they throw at Fnatic's boss, and Fnatic baited them into it, and they fell for it. And then in the Dragonshire game, they were too passive in the mid game, and then they tried to force a fight after burning some heroics into a Falstad and got punished for it, and only got punished for it by a pixel. Like, Justin's mosh pit was off by like a couple of pixels. If he lands it, they win that fight and they win that game. So they learned a ton from this series. They are trying to figure out, like you said, where their new pieces fit, because like Cure is supposed to be the primary ranged carry that's going to save the world. But it turns out Dansky also has a ridiculous Greymane in Li Ming. And I think that's why you saw a lot of, in the group phase, Cure on support, because they were trying to learn what they had in Dansky to identify for the future when double threat became more of a thing, what they could do with these two incredibly gifted mechanical players. So I think, like we've said, they're the best roster in North America. They're not going to have any problem, I don't think, taking first in North America. They learned a lot about shot calling in this experience with Gold Club. They learned a lot about how they can draft. They've now got Dansky, who is also a really good drafter, to help out Justin, and they'll continue to work on that dynamic as they learn the patch. And so I think they're going to have no problem taking North America, but until they start boot camping in Korea or find a way to start getting some good practice against teams who can actually expose their late game shot calling, they're going to have the same issues, because Justin doesn't have enough international experience to be able to close out those games consistently, unless they just really review this footage with a coach and Justin is able to identify really specifically those areas where not just that last call, but the situations that led up to them being in a position where one call could lose them the game. Because the Dragonshire game against Fnatic specifically, there's 7 or 8 calls that needed to be different for them to close out that game, and because each of those calls was made incorrectly, they end up losing. So I think they've honestly, like, Gold Club is an unfair advantage for Roll20. It's almost something that all the other teams in North America should be mad about, is that Roll20 was the only team that got to go to Gold Club, because they got to figure out their roster and get their stuff exposed on an international stage, and no other team did. And that's, to me, that's such an advantage going into 2018 if the roster can stay positive and motivated and learn from that experience instead of getting upset about it. And I think they've got the right people for that.
I agree. I think the team's going to they're going to benefit greatly from this experience. We just need to hope that There, another team in NA, one of these new rosters in NA, kind of rises up to challenge them. To be, you know, the Dignitas to their Fnatic, the team LiQuiuD to their, you know what I mean? They need that rival. They need another team that they can trade punches with, right?
They need old gods to actually work. Like literally, I want to just have it out there so I can retweet it if 6 months from now old gods are at midseason brawl dominating. That roster legitimately has the potential to be number 2 or 3 in the league towards the end of the season. Like, no one's going to say that. I'm not going to predict it on my official like blog predictions for the season or anything, but K1 is a very talented and smart player who's moving to the easiest role to swap to, and he's wanted to be a support for a while, so hopefully that'll fix some of the motivation stuff where he was like playing a new Barak in games for some ungodly reason. Zuna is one of the most mechanically gifted players in North America in any MOBA ever, as much as people love to meme about him. Talk to any pro who's played him in League, talk to any pro who's played him in HOTS. When he's focused and on his prime, he can be better than anyone. Airho is great, and Calf used to be the best tank in the world. So if that roster comes together, the 3 veterans that are coming off of other teams that weren't great situations for them get really excited about this team. I know Calf and Zuna have wanted to play together for a while. If they're able to get motivated by that, there's a real chance that that team could suddenly and randomly become a huge threat. To answer the question in chat, there's a big difference between playing second support and playing actual support. And also GFE was not a super fun place to be, from my understanding, for a lot of folks last year. I mean, Michael Udall retired, and then after people left the roster, he came back. So take that as you want to.
Read into that as you need to.
Yeah, interpret that as you feel like. But yeah, there's a big difference between being the primary support and being the guy that gets stuck on Brightwing and Tassadar sometimes, but then also has to play stuff you don't want to play. Like a lot of teams just kind of threw somebody on second support, and that's not it's not the same thing as being the support who has the cleanse, who gets to make the calls, who gets drafted for in priority, instead of like, oh, well, we need a second support. Let's just pick up a Karazim, I guess. Okay, now you have to play Karazim. Being the actual support main is very different in terms of importance, impact, your self-worth, your identity. Like if you wanted to be a support player, you don't want to be the flex who's the second support. You want to be the support player. And he wasn't going to get that job from Akaface because Aka's good. But now that he's in the role that he wants, on a team that wants him in that role, and he's got the off season to master the role with these people, build up that synergy. It's a huge dark horse pick because the roster also has equally the same amount of possibility to just completely fall apart and be the new Naventic. But if that doesn't happen, I will be boasting a lot on Twitter for having called it if they're really good.
Just Twitch clipping this. Right? All right, so I do want to take a little bit of a deeper look at the Roll20 roster and kind of see how it shaped up through Gold Club before we pivot away from our Gold Club talk. So they played 18 matches throughout the tournament, including playoffs and group stage, and they ran double support 8 times. And I know I keep harping on double support, but it's the most notable comp because it is the one that got players playing roles that they are not comfortable playing, like we were just saying. We saw Cure playing the extra support 6 times. in this tournament, which was kind of unexpected, right? So he had commented that him going to Roll20 was so he could play the range carry. Maybe I misunderstood, but regardless, Cure played a lot of different heroes. He was, I mean, at least roles anyways. We saw him playing Vala, Mouth, Li Ming, Dahaka. I mean, he was everywhere. I guess because they needed someone to play the second support, that's why he ended up doing it. I just thought it was interesting, so I'm making note of it. Dansky's role was a little more defined. He's kind of like got the old Shrimpy role from when Shrimpy was on Fnatic. You know, he's the Medivh, the Genji, Cassia, Gul'dan, Junkrat. He kind of plays that hyper carry role. The guy that's going to, you know, the more micro-intensive heroes, the guy that's going to be, if they're running double support, double warrior, and a hyper carry, he is the hyper carry, right? So I just thought it was interesting. Dansky and Cure, and they didn't really have this problem on Team Freedom because Cure was the solo laner. But if they're both going to be playing the ranged on Roll20, they do kind of have a small hero pool overlap in that they both play Vala, they both played Li Ming, and they both played Greymane. So I'm not saying they need to be quite like Dig, where each person's role is very strictly defined. They can be a little bit more like the old Fnatic roster was, where Quacknix and Shwimpy, some of their hero roles overlapped. But they did have enough that differentiated that they could be pretty flexible. My biggest takeaway, speaking of flexible, from this roster is that it is very flexible. It's the most flexible roster in NA. They can play a lot of different styles because of it. I think it's fair to say, though, in this particular tournament, because the roster was so fresh and they were still kind of figuring out who does what best, that it hurt them because they kind of had everyone, they had a lot of guys who could do a lot of different things, but they didn't quite know who did what best. But I think going forward that they'll be able to leverage that flexibility to their advantage. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or...
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about Roll20 that makes them so, why I'm so willing to put all my chips in for them taking first in North America, mainly it's because they have basically the best available North American player at every position. I've talked before on the show about why I think having a great tank is so important, and they have the best one. They also have a phenomenal support. They have the best offlaner in North America by a wide margin in Goku. And now they have two incredibly mechanically gifted ranged players who both have pretty flexible hero pools, but they can basically play double threat and outplay everybody else. And I think that's what makes them so potentially dangerous, and why once they get their drafting and their shot calling ironed out, we should see them be so strong. I'm going to cough for a second. Yeah, basically they just have the strongest roster in terms of individual players, and it's now just a matter of finding the optimal place to put every player. Because the danger for this roster is to do what Gale Force did when they had the 4 flex thing, because they had so many players that were so good that they were just like, oh, we can play anything and beat anybody, and we can play mind games and draft and put Crone on Muradin, and it's going to work twice, so we think it'll work every time. And then, oh no, it turns out that having 4 flexes is bad. And they now have 2 flexes, and I think that is going to be potentially dangerous, because it's why Dignitas struggled so much, is because they had Snitch and Mene trying to both be flexes, and that didn't work. So my hope is that they kind of narrow the focus of each player into a more specific thing, of having one of them be maybe more focused on the Greymane Vala Tracer style and one person be more focused on like the mages, Tassadar, Medivh type thing, so that they can be a little bit more flexible with that. But right now they've got to we've got to figure out what the new meta is with all of these patch changes, with the laning changes and everything. I mean, the game is so different now that we just really have no idea what's going to happen going into the 2018 HGC, and that's why I think we could potentially see them struggle a little bit towards the beginning as they run into the same scenarios they did in Gold Club, trying to figure out where each thing fits. But once they figure that out, they're just going to murder everybody because they can just outplay everybody else.
I think that I think you hit the nail on the head. It's if they don't fall into the trap of trying to be too flexible, they kind of, I think, not necessarily, they don't have to have strictly defined rules, but I do want to say, I guess clearly defined would be a less powerful description of it. If they have clearly defined rules, they know who's going to play who and when they're going to play them. I think they're going to find a lot of success. I think there's going to be some growing pains. It's going to take time, but I'm excited for the future of that roster. And in particular, we saw it against SPT and they lost, but I'm really excited for the double reset comps on that team because Dansky's Genji is pretty dank, and so is Kira's Li Meng. So I want to see that. I want to see them both popping off and snowball that to a win. Unfortunately, they did get to pull it out against SPT, but they lost with that comp. I don't know why, but they did. Before we transition to the amateur scene, we're not going to do viewer questions at the end tonight, Wonder Raid, because we managed to fill up most of our time slot already. But we will tackle your question right now. I don't know, Trent, if you had a chance to look at it, but my opinion on the matter is that, yeah, if they were to remove healing and rework the supports, they would be more utility, more CC oriented. But what would you think?
My favorite answer now to questions is that seems like a great thing to submit to entry-level esports so that I can talk about it for 30 minutes instead of keeping Bahgz here trapped while I do so. But basically in games like League of Legends, supports are about peel for the carry because hyper carry is more of a thing. And then also having strong crowd control and initiation tools. So having things like Malfurion Root, Twilight Dream, that kind of stuff, you'd have to kind of change the way that you do that in heroes. You'd probably see things more like Tassadar or like Medivh, where positioning and protection are more of a thing. So yeah, I think that's something I would want to spend a lot of time talking about and theorizing about, but this is probably not the best time to do that. But follow Trolls GG so that you can submit your question to entry-level esports when we record next week's show.
That sounds like a good topic for entry-level esports.
I'm very good at plugging my show.
Hey man, it's been working, so I'm glad for that. All right, let's transition to the amateur scene real quick. I'm gonna press this button right here.
And the mastermind storm is awaiting them. Welcome to the paint train.
Kill the boss! Kill the boss! Can they do it? It's too much damage for me! And that's GG!
And it's entirely possible that you were muted for that entire spiel.
Well, I pressed one button, but not the other one.
I'll save it. Guys, there's some amateur stuff. If you think that you're mildly decent at Heroes, go do amateur things.
Heroes Lounge is going on break for 2 weeks. Links are attached in the show notes. Sign-ups for Heroes Hype Holiday Series 90 are open, as well as Nexus Gaming Series Season 3. Sign-ups for those close December 18th. Not sure
I
if...
like my way better.
I mean, yours was a little more succinct. LFM, as far as we know, is still looking for a marketing manager. You can reach out to them on Twitter for details. This is carried over from last week. And with that, Trent, I think that's a wrap for the show. So, thank you all for listening to Trolling HGC, a weekly podcast about Heroes of the Storm eSports. It's a member of the Trolls.gg Entertainment Network, where we stream live on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/TrollsGG, every week on Wednesdays following the Nexus Trolls around 9:30 p.m. Eastern and 6:30 p.m. Pacific. People can follow me on Twitter at BahgzHGC and watch me stream on twitch.tv/Bahgz. As well, if you enjoyed tonight's show and are interested in Blizzard's other esports offerings, consider subscribing to the weekly Blizz, where my buddy Gwaz and I cover all of Blizzard's esports. And
I was on that.
Yes, two episodes ago, we had Trent on the show. We talked Overwatch League and the format and structure of that. So if you're interested in other Blizzard esports, consider giving it a listen. It's on all podcast sources. Trent, where can people follow you?
I am on Twitter at Trent_esports. This past weekend, you saw me bleeding followers talking about Street Fighter, but most of the time I tweet about Heroes because that's what most of you follow me for. You can also check out my blog over on Heroes Hearth. This weekend, there will be a fun exploration of why a third ban is super important in Heroes, and I've got some quotes coming into that from some pro players and some former pro players, so definitely keep an eye out for that.
And again, I'd like to thank all of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, you can support us in a variety of ways. We're on Patreon at patreon.com/TrollsGG. You can follow us on Twitter at Trollin HGC for show announcements and hear the Storm news. Find us on Twitch on twitch.tv/TrollsGG. You can as well you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And make sure to tell us how we're doing. Shoot us a review. Give us comments on Twitter. Something. Let us know. If we're doing something wrong, we're open to trying to improve it. As well, you can visit the website at trolls.gg, read our articles, and catch up with the podcast on demand. And if you need to get in touch with us, DMs are open, or email us at trollin@trolls.gg. And with that, we'll see you in the Nexus. Peace out.